I found the best way to learn 3D is to dive right in. In this video we'll create a Cinema 4D file, but we're not going to get hung up on a lot of the technical stuff just yet. The overarching goal of this video is to get comfortable with just how simple it can be to create 3D from inside of After Effects. In that process we'll learn how to create, view and position 3D objects in the scene, all the while learning something of the key terms most commonly used in the 3D production process. If we look at our project, you can see I have a composition, 3Dfoundations, and it has no layers. So let's get started by creating a Cinema 4D layer. Go up under Layer, choose New, Maxon Cinema 4D File. Now we need to specify where to save the file. I recommend saving it somewhere next to your After Effects project. I'm going to save mine in the exercise files, under Chapter A in the Cinema Projects folder. I'll call it Foundation. Now you'll probably see a file already saved with the same name. You can go ahead and save over the file. With Cinema open, I know you have the urge to click through all the different parts of the interface. But in order to get a quick start, I'm going to go ahead and just start you through certain parts of the interface. Since we're all coming from the Adobe world, I'm going to start creating our 3D models with a tool that's similar to the pen tool. You can create splines inside of Cinema 4D using some of these different tools. So let's come up to the top corner here. This toolbar is a creation toolbar, and in here is where we go to create any new objects in our scene. So if we click on the second button and hold, you'll see I have 6 different kinds of path tools. These are all different spline tools, but the one we'll probably be most familiar with is the Bezier tool. So let's go ahead and choose that option. Now with the Bezier tool active, you'll notice its name popped up here in the attributes panel, and before I just start clicking in 3D, let's go ahead and click in the upper right corner to bring up our 4 view. These other views are orthogonal views. They'll make sure that I stay in the true 2D plane. Let's choose the front view by clicking the same box in the upper corner. To create a shape, all we have to do is click and move and click and move. If you click and drag, you can draw out handles, just like with the pen tool in After Effects. So I'm going to create a basic shape. Now, unlike in After Effects, I'm not going to click right back on the first point. After we started clicking on the splines, the attributes panel down here on the right updated, and now we have some of these options under the options section for our spline. You want to select closed line, that way the path stays closed. If we go ahead and switch our views by clicking in the corners again, let's orbit around what we've created. The next tool over in our port is the orbit tool. So you can see I've created a perfectly flat spline. Now I can create 3D geometry from this relatively easily using a NURBS extrusion. So the term NURBS stands for non-uniform rational baselines. Don't worry, there's not a quiz later, just remember that with NURBS objects you can take paths like this and create 3D. So I'm going to go to this third button here and click and hold. Let's choose Extrude NURBS with Extrude NURBS active in the object panel. Now I can click on the spline and drag it up on top of the name for Extrude NURBS, making sure that I have an arrow pointing down. When I let go, now I've created my first 3D shape. If you click on the Extrude NURBS object in the Object Manager, notice now I have options down here in the Attributes Manager. If we look at the movement section, go the third area over and just click and drag on the double arrows. Let's drag up. Now if I go and orbit around my scene, you can see I've created a rather thick 3D object. It's very abstract, but it's there. Now to recenter things in the scene, you can go ahead and click the pen behind tool, which is the third one over, and if I want to zoom in and out, I can click the zoom tool. We've seen how to create splines, we've seen how to create extrude NURBS from these splines. There's another way to create geometry inside of Cinema 4D, and that's using primitive objects. Now since we're in a 3D space, if I want to create a primitive object, it's going to appear right here in the center of the scene. This area is called the origin. So anytime you go to create a new object, it's probably wise to move the old one out of the way. I'm going to go to the upper left corner of our interface, and here we have 4 tools that will help you position and select any objects in your projects. So this tool with the 4 arrows, let's click on it, and it's our move tool. So I can click and drag directly on the control handles for the objects, or if I click on the object I can freely move it around the scene. If I click on these angles here, see these corners, they'll allow me to move on a plane. Now to more clearly see how I'm moving, I'm going to go to the 4 view and now I'll click back on that plane and move around, and here you can see in the top view I'm not moving anywhere along the Z-axis. I'm just moving up and down and around. I want to move this out of the way, so I'm going to click on the Z-axis this time and just move this down out of the view of our camera. Well, relatively it's still peak out in the corner though. To create a NURBS object, we'll go back up to our Creations tools and click and hold on the Q. Notice these are a bunch of different NURB objects we can create. Let's start with a cube. When we add a cube to the scene, let's go ahead and change back to perspective. Now with the move tool I can quickly and easily just move the cube. Now if I go back and grab my selection tool, there are some extra handles I can grab with my primitive object. I can do that while I'm in object mode. So over here in the left, these are different selection modes for your interface. So if we click the top one, I get object mode or model mode. This will allow me to click on my model as a whole. Now if I click and drag on any one of these golden axes, this little golden box here, it'll allow me to change the size or the dimensions of my primitive objects. Now if we now go back under 4 view, here you can clearly see I've created this kind of skinny box. Now if I want to make more changes, I can select the cube in the objects panel and the attribute panel will update, and I can do something like fillet. This will round the edges of my cube box so I have a little bit more of an organic shape, kind of like a bar of soap. Now the third form of modeling you should probably be familiar with inside of Cinema is polygon modeling. Now most objects we can create either with splines or cubes, and along the spline option we can even extrude Illustrator splines. I'll show you how to do that later in the chapter. If we go to the cube object right here, when I go ahead and click around, I'm just positioning in the scene, but notice it's one smooth object. If we go to the display options here in our viewer, I could switch it to crude shading lines and it shows me the actual lines required to create this geometry. But what if I just wanted to select only one small part of the geometry? Convert this to editable, that's the name of the process. If we click this button in the upper left corner, it'll change our object from a primitive object into a polygon object. Now, if we look in the upper right corner of our interface, under objects, you can see the triangle. That's letting me know it's a polygon object. So now if we come back over here to our selection tools, I can click here on the polygon tool, and any polygon face that I roll over with my selection tool, it will allow me to select. If I'd rather select edges, I could do that and roll over the edges or points wherever the edges intersect. I'm going to go back to polygons and just click on this first big polygon and pull it out. Notice when I pull it out over I've changed my geometry, but everything is sort of still stuck together. Once you have different polygons or NURBS, you can actually smooth things out using a thing called hyper-NURBS. I'm going to hold down the Option key and then click on this third button. When I click on that, it's going to smooth out the shape that I created using a hyper-NURBS object. This is kind of a blend between both worlds, but it actually gives me a beautiful amount of control. If I want to view the scene as though it were rendering, I would click the render button in the top center of the scene. Now the last thing about 3D are textures, and since we've already covered a lot of ground up to this point, I'm going to click create and just load a material preset. If we go to light under materials, we could choose ice and snow, and I'm going to choose this ice cracked option. Now if I want to apply that to my object, I can just click it and drag it and then go ahead and render it, and you can see I've created a very interesting 3D shape. When you first get started in 3D, there are 3 modes of modeling. We have the splines, and then we extrude those with NURBS, and then we can convert those into polygons, though we don't have to. And we could also smooth any of those out using hyper-NURBS. So now we've had a quick whirlwind tour, I think you're ready to move on and actually worry about some of the nuts and bolts. If you want to see your project inside of After Effects, all you have to do is click Save in Cinema, and then when you jump back into After Effects, it will go ahead and update and show you the scene. And since 3D is slightly more render intensive than a standard After Effects project, by default our 3D object is going to be shown to us in kind of a wireframe mode. If you want to see the full resolution, you need to go to your Cineware Effect Control panel and change the renderer from software to standard final. It'll take a second to render, but once it does, now you can see we've successfully brought our 3D object back into After Effects.